To everyone on the outside, my life looked like something worth envying. My husband and I had a three-bedroom house in a quiet suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio. We had two cars in the driveway, a golden retriever named Biscuit who liked to steal socks, and a standing reservation at the Italian place on 5th Street every anniversary. People at my office used to say things like, "You two are so solid," and I would smile and say thank you and believe it, mostly because I needed to. What they didn't see was the version of my life that happened behind closed doors. My husband, I'll call him my husband because that's what he was, even when he stopped acting like it, had a way of making me feel small without raising his voice. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the kind of thing you could point to and say, "There, that's it, that's the moment." It was more like water damage, slow, quiet, and by the time he noticed the ceiling was caving in, the rot had already been there for years. It started with small things. He'd correct the way I loaded the dishwasher in front of his mother, laughing like it was a joke. He'd sigh when I talked about getting a promotion. Not because he was unsupportive, he'd say, but because he worried about my stress levels. When I got the senior coordinator position at the non-profit where I worked, he took me to dinner and spent most of it talking about his own job. I told myself that was just who he was. Distracted, not dismissive. Then his mother moved in. She had broken her hip the previous winter, and I understood, truly I did, that family helps family. I was the one who suggested the guest room. I cleared out the boxes I'd stored in there, bought a new mattress, put a little lamp on the nightstand because she liked reading before bed. I wanted to be a good daughter-in-law. I thought if I was generous enough, patient enough, kind enough, the house would feel like home for all three of us. It didn't work out that way. His mother had opinions about everything, the temperature of the house, the groceries I bought, the shows I watched. She'd ask him, not me, whether we were having people over. She'd call him into the kitchen to taste things and then ask him if he thought the sauce needed more garlic, as if I weren't standing 3 feet away. My husband went along with all of it. He said she was just particular. He said I was reading into things. He said I needed to give her more time to adjust. I gave her 18 months. By the time spring came around last year, I had gotten quieter, not meeker, quieter. There's a difference. I had started paying close attention. I watched the way he talked to me, in front of her versus when we were alone. I noticed that when she said something unkind, he would laugh and change the subject. But when I said I was tired, he would ask why I wasn't managing my time better. I started keeping a mental catalogue. Not out of bitterness, not yet, more like self-preservation. Then I found the texts. I wasn't snooping. His phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower, and the preview showed enough. A name I recognized. A woman from his office I had met at the company holiday party 2 years ago. She had shaken my hand and told me my earrings were beautiful, and I had thanked her and thought nothing of it. Standing there in my kitchen, still in my work clothes, reading the preview on his screen, I thought, how long? I didn't ask him. I didn't cry. I went to the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror for a long time. Then I washed my face, changed into pajamas, and lay in bed next to him that night with my eyes open and my breathing even. I needed to know how far this had gone before I did anything. Over the next 3 weeks, I became a different kind of wife. On the surface, nothing changed. I cooked dinner. I walked Biscuit. I made polite conversation with his mother at the breakfast table, but underneath all of it, I was moving quietly. I called my best friend. She's been my person since college, the kind of friend who picks up on the second ring at any hour, and told her everything. She came over one afternoon while my husband was at work and his mother was at her physical therapy appointment, and she sat at my kitchen table and listened to me talk for 2 hours straight. "What do you want to do?" she asked me. "I want it to hurt," I said, "but I want to be the one who walks out standing." She nodded like that was the most reasonable thing she'd ever heard. Then she said, "I think I know someone." I should back up. My best friend, Rosalie, had been seeing someone for about 4 months by this point. She was excited about him but cautious. He was newly divorced, and she'd told me early on that she was taking it slow. His name was Marcus. He was an architect, mid-30s, thoughtful in a way that she said sometimes caught her off guard. She'd mentioned that his ex-wife had cheated on him with a co-worker. He didn't talk about it often, but when he did, she said there was no bitterness, just something tired and resigned. "He's not fragile," Rosalie said. "He's solid. And he would do this for me, I know he would." "Do what exactly?" I asked. She looked at me. "Come to your birthday dinner." My 32nd birthday was 2 weeks away. My husband had suggested we do something small at home. His mother had started using the word exhausting about restaurant trips. And I had agreed. Just the three of us, plus a few of his friends he'd already invited, and two of my co-workers I genuinely liked. But I had something else in mind now. C, the woman from his office, the one whose name had been on his phone, worked under a partner at his firm, a senior partner, a man who had the kind of authority that could affect promotions, project assignments, the whole shape of someone's career. And as it turned out, that senior partner was Marcus. Rosalie had told me months ago, casually in the way you share details about someone new you're dating. I had not thought about it again until that afternoon at my kitchen table. And then I thought about nothing else. I called Marcus myself. Rosalie was in the room when I did it. She'd offered to make the call for me. But I wanted to be the one to explain. I told him everything. About the texts. About the months before that. About my husband's colleague and what I suspected. He was quiet for a moment when I finished, and then he said, very calmly, "She's been telling everyone at the firm that she's single." Something clicked into place then, not anger exactly, more like clarity. Marcus agreed to come. I spent the 2 weeks before my birthday the way I imagine people prepare for something important, carefully, without telling anyone who didn't need to know. I confirmed the guest list with my husband. I helped his mother pick out what she was going to wear. I ordered the cake from the bakery on Broad Street that made the lemon raspberry one I'd been wanting for 3 years and never ordered because my husband said it was too fancy for a small party. This year I ordered the large. I also called my co-workers and told them privately that I might need a little backup. They knew something had been off with me. You can't work next to someone for 4 years and not notice when they go quiet. They said they'd be there. The night of the dinner, I got dressed in the bedroom alone. I wore the green dress I'd bought 6 months ago and worn exactly nowhere, because every time I'd suggested going out, something had come up. I did my hair the way I used to before the house felt like it belonged to someone else. I looked at myself in the mirror and thought, this is the last time you stand in this room pretending. My husband was downstairs when I came down. He looked up from his phone and said, "You look nice." His mother, already seated at the dining table, looked over and said nothing. Guests started arriving around 7. His friends came first, the couples we used to see more often before everything contracted. My co-workers arrived together, gave me a hug that lasted a bit longer than usual, and I squeezed back to let them know I was okay. At 7:15, my husband's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and said he'd just be a minute and stepped outside. I watched through the kitchen window as he walked to the end of the driveway, talking. I could not hear him, but I didn't need to. He came back inside and said there would be one more guest joining. He said it casually, like it was nothing, like he'd simply forgotten to mention it before. His mother looked up from her wine and smiled, and I understood then that she had known. "Of course," I said. "The more the merrier." She arrived at 7:30. Same woman from the holiday party. Same confident posture. She hugged my husband in the entryway, not a long hug, but not a quick one either, and then turned to me and said, "Happy birthday. Your home is beautiful." "Thank you," I said. "I'm so glad you could make it." I took her coat. I offered her a drink. I introduced her to the other guests with a smile that I had been practicing for 2 weeks. My husband watched me with something in his eyes that I can only describe as relief, like he'd expected a scene and was grateful not to be getting one. His mother refilled her glass. At 7:45, Rosalie arrived. She knocked twice and I opened the door, and there she was, and beside her was Marcus. He was taller than I'd imagined from her descriptions. He had the kind of face that was easy to read, patient, direct. He held a bottle of wine and said, "Happy birthday. Thank you for having me." "Thank you for coming," I said, and I meant it entirely. I brought them into the living room. I made introductions around the group, easy and natural, just another guest and his girlfriend at a birthday dinner. And then I turned to the woman from my husband's office and I said, "Oh, have you two met? Marcus is an architect. I think he works in a firm near yours, actually." She turned. I watched it happen. The recognition. The sequence of things crossing her face. Confusion first, then understanding. Then something that looked a lot like the floor dropping out from under her. She opened her mouth and closed it once, and Marcus looked at her with an expression that was not angry, not triumphant, just very, very calm. "Vivienne," he said, just her name, nothing else. She said, how do you?" and then stopped. My husband, who had been refilling his drink at the bar cart in the corner, looked over. He had gone still. I could feel it from across the room, the way you feel a drop in temperature. Rosalie, to her credit, said nothing. She just touched Marcus's arm lightly and looked at the ceiling, which was the thing she did when she was trying not to laugh. Vivienne set her glass down on the coffee table. It tipped slightly, not over, but enough that the wine sloshed close to the edge. She grabbed it before it fell. My husband's mother, who had been watching all of this with an expression she was trying to make neutral, put her own glass down very deliberately. The room had gone the specific kind of quiet that happens when everyone present understands they are watching something real. I said very pleasantly, "Can I get anyone more to eat?" Vivienne left before the cake. She made an excuse, something about an early morning, something about traffic, and my husband walked her to the door and they stood in the entryway for a moment, and I did not go after them, but I did not pretend not to notice either. When he came back into the living room, his jaw was tight and his eyes didn't quite settle on anything. His mother said, quietly, "I don't know what you think you did." I looked at her. "I threw a birthday party," I said. "That's all. My co-workers stayed until 10. Rosalie and Marcus stayed until almost 11, and before they left, Marcus shook my hand and said, 'For what it's worth, I've been meaning to reassign her to another team for some time.' This made the conversation easier. He said it without drama, like he was talking about a scheduling conflict. I thanked him for coming and meant it. After everyone left, my husband and I stood in the kitchen. His mother had gone to bed. Biscuit was asleep on the couch. The lemon raspberry cake was still on the counter, with 3 slices gone. He said, "You plan that?" "I had people over for my birthday," I said. "Don't do that." His voice was low, but there was something underneath it. Not quite anger, more like the specific frustration of someone who has been outmaneuvered and knows it. "You knew who he was." "I know a lot of people," I said. He looked at me for a long moment. There was something in his face I hadn't seen before. Not remorse exactly, but the beginning of a reckoning. Like he was doing math in his head and not liking the numbers. "What do you want?" he said finally. I thought about it. Not for long, because I had been thinking about it for weeks, really. "I want my name off the joint account and my direct deposit rerouted by Friday," I said. "I want the car that's in my name. I want you to tell your mother she has 60 days, not because I'm being cruel, but because I've already spoken to a real estate attorney, and that's the timeline we're working with." I paused. "And I want you to stop lying, at minimum to my face." He stared at me. I cut myself a slice of the cake. It was exactly as good as I'd imagined. The next morning I woke up before he did and made coffee and sat on the back porch with Biscuit's head in my lap and watched the yard go from dark to grey to pale gold. The neighbour's kid was already up, riding his bike in circles in the driveway next door. The air smelled like cut grass and something faintly sweet. Maybe the roses the woman 2 doors down had been nursing all spring. Everything looked the same. Everything had changed. My husband's mother came downstairs at 7:30 and found me in the kitchen. She stood in the doorway for a moment, holding her robe closed at the collar, and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite name. Not apology, She wasn't built for that. But something less certain than she'd looked the night before. You should have said something, she said finally. If things were bad. I tried, I said, a few times. She nodded slowly and looked out the window. We didn't say anything else, but there was something different in the space between us, not warmth, not exactly, more like mutual acknowledgement. The long performance was over. Rosalie called at noon. I was at my desk at work eating lunch, trying to get through a normal Tuesday. Marcus told me he's moving Vivienne's whole account portfolio, she said. She's losing the Henderson project. 3 months of work. She paused. I know that sounds petty to say out loud. It doesn't, I said. Are you okay? I thought about it honestly, the way I'd stopped letting myself think about things for a long time. The kitchen in the morning, the coffee getting cold while I listened to my husband's mother reorganize my refrigerator. The way I had started saving money in a separate account, not because I was planning to leave, but because some part of me had known I might need to. The green dress I'd worn to my own birthday party in my own house and finally felt like myself. Yeah, I said, I actually am. I won't pretend the weeks after that were easy. They weren't. There were conversations that felt like excavating something heavy, and nights where the house felt too large and too quiet, and a moment in the grocery store when I stood in the cereal aisle for probably 4 minutes longer than necessary because I didn't know what to buy now that I was only buying for one. But there was also this, the first Friday after everything. My direct deposit hit my personal account, and I sat in my car in the office parking lot and looked at the notification on my phone and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not relief exactly. Steadiness. Like the ground under me was mine again. My husband and I filed the paperwork 6 weeks later. His mother had already moved into a senior apartment community in Westerville. My husband had found it, and to his credit, he'd handled it without involving me. On the day I signed the final documents, I drove home and walked Biscuit around the block twice. And the second time around, my neighbor called from her porch to say she'd heard I was keeping the house, and she was glad. I hadn't known anyone had noticed. Rosalie and Marcus came over for dinner the following Saturday. I made the pasta dish I'd been saving for some occasion that never seemed to come, and Marcus brought a bottle of wine that was far too good for a casual Saturday. And we sat on the back porch until the fireflies came out and talked about nothing particularly important for 2 hours. At some point, Marcus said quietly and without ceremony, "You handled that with a lot of grace." I thought about the green dress and the lemon cake and the look on my husband's face when he realized the floor had shifted beneath him. I thought about all the mornings I'd made coffee for people who made me feel invisible in my own kitchen. I thought about Rosalie picking up on the second ring. I had help, I said. The fireflies were everywhere by then. Small lights drifting up from the grass and into the dark. Biscuit was asleep under the table. Somewhere down the block, someone was playing music low enough that you could only feel the bass line. I was 32 years old, sitting in my own backyard, and for the first time in a very long time, I was not waiting for someone to tell me the evening was over. I've thought a lot about the version of myself who stood in the cereal aisle for 4 minutes, staring at nothing, because she didn't know what to buy for one person anymore. That woman wasn't weak. She was recalibrating. And I think that matters, the difference between being lost and being in the middle of finding your way back. What happened in my house that birthday night wasn't luck. It wasn't some twist of fate that dropped Marcus into Rosalie's life just in time for him to walk through my front door and upend everything. What it actually was, and I've turned this over many times since, was the result of choices. Long, quiet, unglamorous choices that I made over months, while everyone around me assumed I was simply going along. I kept my own account. I read everything carefully before I signed it. I didn't quit my job when the pressure to slow down started coming from inside the house. None of those things felt heroic at the time. They felt like stubbornness, honestly. But stubbornness, when you point it in the right direction, turns into something steadier, something you can actually stand on. I think about Vivienne too. Not with bitterness. That passed faster than I expected, but with a kind of clinical curiosity. She had made her own choices. She had told people at her firm she was single while building something with my husband. She had walked into my home and complimented my house and accepted a drink from my hand. And the thing that undid her wasn't me. It wasn't a confrontation or an ultimatum or a scene. It was simply that the world she'd been performing in turned out to be smaller than she thought, and the people in it were more connected than she'd accounted for. What you build on dishonesty has a ceiling. It always does. My husband used to say I was too careful, too deliberate, that I overthought everything. I used to apologize for it. Now I understand that what he was really asking me to do was stop paying attention and paying attention to your own finances, to the small shifts in how someone speaks to you, to the difference between being loved and being managed is one of the most important things you can do for yourself. It isn't cold, it isn't unromantic, it's just honest. The last thing I want to say is this: I didn't get through any of it alone. Rosalie picked up on the second ring. My co-workers showed up and stood in my corner without being asked to do much more than that. Marcus came to a stranger's birthday dinner because someone he cared about asked him to, and he handled the whole thing with a kind of quiet decency that I still think about. That's the part people sometimes miss in stories like mine. The strength wasn't all mine. Some of it was borrowed, and borrowing it didn't make it less real. I sat on my back porch the morning after everything ended and watched my yard come into the light and thought, I am 32 years old and I am not waiting anymore. Not for permission, not for the right moment, not for someone to decide the evening was over. That feeling, I want to hold on to that one.